Hi, and thanks for joining us at FinovateEurope. My name is David Penn. I'm a research analyst with Finovate. And joining me today is Tan Lee, founder and CEO of EMOTIV, who's joining us for what I think is going to be a fascinating and probably too brief conversation on some of the most interesting things that I've heard in technology. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, David.
Yeah. First, could you tell us just a little bit about yourself and the company that you founded, EMOTIV?
Yeah, so I can tell you a lot about myself, but a brief synopsis. I'm an Aussie girl that's transplanted to the Bay Area. I've lived there for 14 years now, and I started the company about 7 years ago.
Interesting, interesting. Well, let's just jump right in. The presentation you did this morning, I had a chance to see that. Unbelievable stuff, talking about brain augmentation, talking about some of the ways that, that technology is enabling us to really tap into maybe our most fundamental power, the power of the brain.
Yes.
One of the things I thought was interesting in your discussion was where you began with automation and inequality, which certainly automation comes up in the context of technology, but the inequality not as much, though more of late. Why did you want to start your conversation there?
I think for business leaders, it's more and more important for us to think about the society and the polarization that we're seeing in society and the fragmentation that can happen. And so for me, one of the biggest challenges, global challenges that we're going to have to face is the challenges that automation brings, but also the inequality that is staggering today. You know, Oxfam's latest figures shows that 1% of the world's population controls 83% of the world's wealth. Wow. That's a terrifying number, and it's not getting better. And so unless, as people who are shaping the future, if we're not thinking about it, if business leaders, if people who are driving the financial sector is not thinking about inequality, then I think that it's a missed opportunity for us to do something about it. Yes. I don't want it to be a fait accompli.
Right, and that was one of the things we were talking about just a little bit before we got started here, about how I was particularly impressed during your presentation how so much of those concerns seem to be baked in from the very beginning of the work that you're doing, and particularly given how advanced and sophisticated that work is, I found it very heartening, quite frankly, to see that this isn't something where after the fact we have to sort of work and go backward and take care of that things. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is it sort of a generational thing, do you think?
I think it's also because of the fundamental technology that we're working with. It's the human brain, which 8 billion of the people on the planet, we all have one, each one unique. And so when you're working with a system as complex as that, as incredible as it is, you have to respect what you're doing. And when you're talking about human augmentation or human enhancement, there's a massive opportunity to not just talk about wealth inequality, but to also talk about cognitive inequalities as well. If you're going to augment and enhance human capabilities and you have a whole raft of people who can do things that others can't, then we are going to amplify the disparity in our society even more. And so because of what we're working with, I think it's always been top of mind, and we feel that as people who are creating this field, we have a responsibility to steward it in and create a positive future rather than to just let whatever happens. You can't be irresponsible when you're creating new technology. I think it's very important. It's incumbent on us to be very thoughtful about the future that we are going to usher in with our technologies. As much as it's intoxicating and exciting and brilliant to create it, I think we have a very, very deeply enshrined responsibility as well. And that's very important to us and the whole team.
Yeah, truly. So let's just look a little bit specific for folks to sort of get an idea of exactly what we're talking about. For those of you who didn't see the presentation, the technology involves a bit of hardware, a bit of software, and maybe you could talk just about some of the current use cases, some of the examples, so that folks can start to get their minds around, no pun intended, just what we're talking about with brain augmentation.
Yeah, so the first thing is this is a non-invasive technology. It's built on electroencephalography, which is EEG for short, measures electrical fluctuations that result from neurons firing deep inside the brain, and we're just measuring the changes in electrical fluctuations. But what we can do is to then interpret those signals and do two main things. One is to control the external environment, so digital and physical environments. You can translate your thought into action. The other side of it is while you're already using this technology, we can also start to understand and provide a feedback loop. So we can understand when you're focused, when you're paying attention, what actually really works for you, and you can start to passively influence your environment. And so the combination of these two allows us to, it obviously augmented with other technologies like artificial intelligence, allows us to become a better version of ourselves. This technology is not designed to exist in a vacuum. It's not just about just measuring the brain, but it's also about providing feedback back to the individual so that they can make better choices about how they can improve their lives.
And that was one of the things about your presentation that I thought was so holistic. You showed instances of people who had been who had physical challenges through a variety of circumstances and how they were able to use the technology. You also showed instances of there was the woman who was working and who was able to use the other aspect of the technology you talked to sort of in a sense guide herself through her workday and to realize moments of greater or lesser productivity, greater or lesser stress, and those sorts of things.
Right, absolutely. And I think it's really important with technologies like this because it's an enabler. It's an opportunity to create a much more inclusive society and to extend capability. So often when we think about human augmentation, we think about bringing back capacity to people who've lost it, and that's the stuff that's less controversial. Whereas when we start to talk about enhancement, then when you're able-bodied and you want to be a better version of yourself. So for example, the athletes that want to really hyper understand not just their physical well-being, but their cognitive capabilities as well, and using, really fine-tuning that so that they can play at their peak. That's another level. And we're talking completely about non-invasive technology, but once we straddle through to the other end of the spectrum where we're talking about invasive technologies, then it's going to be a far more challenging topic to talk about. And I think that's why the opportunity is here now for us to really broach the conversation with the public and really start to understand the opportunities that these technologies bring from a non-invasive standpoint, because we can take it off, we can just choose not to wear it. But in the future, when these technologies become embedded in everyday life, when you can have a simple implant in just underneath your hairline, and you can have access to the world at your fingertips, the internet. It's breathtaking, the potential of that technology. But unless we really think about what it can do and how we manage that and regulate that today, it will be a very difficult opportunity for us to navigate, and the challenges surrounding that will be far more complicated at that point. So I think it's a great opportunity to deal with it now.
Certainly.
In a non-invasive form, to better understand and to really have conversation, to see how do we bring more people along instead of leaving a whole raft of people behind.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, looking forward, I mean, certainly this is the kind of thing it's almost impossible to predict what the pace of development, these sorts of things. But as we look out over 2019, as we look out over the next few years, where do you see this technology going? I thought the point that you made about the maybe cumbersome looking headgear actually being a good thing for now, for many of the reasons that you just pointed out.
I think the near-term opportunities is really going to be the workplace, improving workplace productivity. We have a changing global workforce.
Certainly.
The talent pool is changing, the modality that we engage at work is changing, and yet the responsibilities for employers remain largely the same. And so the responsibility to continue to look after your employees, whether they are remote workers or mobile workers, is still there. And so I think it's a great opportunity to start to have touch points. Right? If you can understand if someone is stressed, it's easy if you check into work and you see your workmate is not feeling so good, you're like, hey, why don't you go home, get some rest, right? But it's hard when you're just working remotely and the only interaction is online or via email. How do you have the same touch points? And yet the responsibility as an employer is still there to make sure that you care for your staff and make sure they're productive. And so I think there's a great opportunity in the workplace as the workplace changes in the next 5 years to really use these technologies to augment and empower individuals to have a much more productive day and also to justify having a much more flexible type of work environment as well. Because if I need a break, it's much better to allow that to happen rather than to compel people to just sit there if they're no longer productive. So I think that's a very empowering thing to afford. And I think the conversation about the workplace is changing. That flexibility is changing. And so I think it goes hand in hand. In the next 5 years, I think those are going to be the really big opportunities. And then once outside the workplace, I think there will be a massive opportunity to start integrating into the homes once some of these technologies like Siri and Alexa become more commonplace. I think there will be an opportunity to then connect with what is the most pervasive thing, which is you. Right?
Absolutely.
So these technologies live in the cloud. They don't live just on your phone or in a machine. They actually are connected to the cloud, so they really could be anywhere. So the one persistent thing is you. And so if there was a way to continue to connect with this intelligent virtual agent anywhere you are, the potential is incredible, right? Think about being able to just know or ask someone if you're confused, the prompt comes up and says, okay, how can I help you? Instead of you having to say, oh, get confused and days. And I think that seamless integration with our daily life is going to be quite incredible in the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I did want to ask how folks who are interested in this and really finding this to be something that they would like to follow, how do they do that? Just keeping up with the work that you're doing at EMOTIV is the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. And also the World Economic Forum has a Global Future Council on Neurotechnologies, and we're doing a lot of work in shaping this whole industry at the moment as well.
Excellent, excellent. We'll definitely encourage people to check a look at that. I know I will be. I want to thank you again for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Again, fascinating presentation. Great to talk with you, and we're certainly going to be looking forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you, David.
All right, thank you, and thank you for joining us as well.